Hi, Mr. Blesky here. I wanted to go through some of the data tables that you created. I know many of you, this was a struggle because I didn't tell you how to create the data table, but this is something that is important, especially when you have lots of information and lots of data to figure out a way to identify what's independent, what's the dependent. Do I need all this information? And making sure that I'm doing to the nearest tenth of a centimeter if needed. So it's just a way to figure out how to organize your data table. And so what I've done before you go off and share your data table with other students, and they have difficulty with trying to figure out where do I put my data, and is this even the correct variable that I want to be changing? I have taken some of your classmates, or even particularly yours, data table that you turned in as the assignment. And we're just going to kind of go through and see if they meet the criteria for what makes an effective data table. So these are some things that I had put on the assignment to kind of watch for. I have added a few, like the title, and I have also taken off the one where some of you are trying to put two different independent variables in the same data table. So we're just going to look at basically your hypothesis, what you think affected the runoff. So I'm just going to get started, and I'm going to ask you some questions throughout, and we're going to kind of go through. I'm not going to tell you whose it was. You might know if it's yours. And then this gives you the opportunity to look and see, ooh, do I need to change anything on my data table before I go and share it with someone else and get some feedback and get a grade from that? So I'm going to go ahead, and I've taken this, what makes an effective data table, and I have kind of made a little checklist on the side of each one. And I do want you to kind of open this up. This is the simulation. It's runoff.modelmywatershed.org. And you're going to kind of pause the video and take a look and see if you could put some of the data that they're asking you to do into the data table that they created. So you do need this opened up. It's called runoff.modelmywatershed.org /. So I'm just going to continue on. So here is one person's data table that they turned in as an assignment. So you just kind of want to look through and see, okay, if this is actually what I have in front of me, and they're saying soil infiltration and they're saying the runoff, I'm going to try to figure out if I could enter some of that data into this data table. So I put like that little checklist off to the side. I'm looking for, is the independent variable labeled? Is the dependent variable labeled and left blank so that I can fill it in? Do I have some fixed variables? These are things that would be constant that you can continue to keep the same. Do they have the units to the nearest whatever it was? Is it clear and concise? Can conclusions be made? And is there a title? Many of these don't have a title. That is one thing we're going to talk about and make sure that you add to that. That was not in the original. So it looks like I can, they want me to have the independent variable. It looks like that is labeled for me, the soil infiltration. So that independent variable is something that I can change. So I'm going to go over here to my simulation, and I need to change this infiltration. So I'm going to look over here. I can change precipitation. I can change land cover. I can change hydraulic soil group, but it does not look like I can set the infiltration. So that is something that I cannot change. So even though they have this independent variable labeled for me, and it seems like that's a great thing that they labeled it for me, it is not actually something that I can alter and change. I can get this to change if I change some of the precipitation, or if I change the land cover, or if I change the soil group. I can see that this bar and this number does change, but that would be a dependent variable. That is something that can be measured, and those are the results, not something that I can actually change. I'm also not quite sure about what land cover I should pick. I'm not sure what precipitation I should set this at. I'm not sure what hydraulic soil group to set this at. So they don't really have any fixed variables, those constants that I should constantly keep it at the same thing every single time. They didn't mention what I should set these at. So there's some things that definitely need to be fixed on this one. That it was nice that they did put the units in there for me, but again, I'm not sure, is it to the nearest, am I supposed to round this 0.8 centimeters up to 1 centimeter, or should I keep it as 0.8 centimeters? So I'm not sure if they want me to do it to the nearest tenth or not. So I'm going to continue on to the next one. So again, here's one of your classmates, or it could be yours, that we're looking at. This was one that was turned in. This one kind of gave me a little explanation ahead of time, which was nice. I can see that they have different land coverings and the runoff. Um, so it says to use the default rain and hydraulic soil group. So whatever is the default. So whenever you start opening this up and you just start it just like normal, it defaults to right in the center for precipitation. It looks like developed low, and it looks like high infiltration. Now, if I wasn't sure about what was the default, that might be nice for that person to put that in there exactly where the rain precipitation should be, which hydraulic soil group, instead of just saying default. But at least they told me that those are things that should stay consistent throughout. So they do a nice job about telling me those fixed variables, those constants that I should have. They could also put those into the data table as well and just make sure that those were all set at kind of medium or 5 centimeters precipitation, and the hydraulic soil group is always A. It appears that the independent variable, the thing that they want me to change, looks like I'm supposed to change the land covering. So I'm supposed to go from open to low to medium to high, and I'm supposed to be writing down the runoff data from that. So it looks like those things are identified. It would be nice if they were maybe potentially labeled. They left it blank for me. They did put some units. I'm not sure if it's to the nearest. I'm not quite sure what this should be. I'm assuming it should be land cover and not precipitation or hydraulic soil group. So I shouldn't have to guess. That should definitely be labeled. But I could probably see some conclusions could be made to see that, oh, if there's more developed land, I might see this in my runoff. So I could definitely have some conclusions that could be made from this. So moving on to the next one. Here is another one that one of your classmates turned in as well. And it looks like, again, they have some things labeled, some little explanation. And I'm just going to kind of check and see, does it meet this criteria right here? So it is labeled, which is nice, but you have to be careful and make sure that it is labeled correctly. So independent variables are things that we can change. So the land cover is definitely something that I can change over here. That is something I can change. But there's a lot of things to change on the land cover. It wasn't just a little bit. There was lots of things I could change. So I might want to like narrow that down to say, well, are you looking at like the developed from open, low, and medium? Or are you looking at water, completely water, to a little bit of water, to no water at all? Um, to try to figure out if that makes a difference. So you might want to fill that in for the person, or just leave it open for them to make some conclusions on their own. And then they told me the dependent variables are things that I measure. So it says that I can measure the precipitation, I can measure the soil group. But when I go over here, I actually can change the precipitation. That means I can change that. That's an independent variable. And I can change the soil group. And when I change the soil group, this runoff and this infiltration actually changes. And those are my results. So these are my dependent variables, not the precipitation. That's something that I can change, and I can change the soil group. So even though it says, and it looks like it's nice that it's labeled, it's not labeled correctly. So I have to be careful on that. The runoff, They don't really tell us what that runoff is to the nearest. So I'm hoping that that runoff is going to be to the nearest tenth of a centimeter, and that's an easy fix for that person. Because if change the land cover and I change the precipitation and I change the hydraulic soil group, I cannot make any conclusions. So if I change this and I change this and I'm changing this, well, obviously lots of things are going to change. Look at that runoff is humongous. And then I go ahead and change it over to here, and then I change it to this. If I'm constantly changing that, I cannot tell why that runoff changed. Was it the land cover? Was it precipitation? I need to make sure that I have that conclusions can be made from my hypothesis. And it looks like the person wanted to change the land cover. Again, that runoff, they don't mention if that is the dependent variable or if the runoff is the independent variable. But we do know that as I change this land covering, that does give me the results. So we do know that that runoff is the dependent variable, not the precipitation and soil group. So I'm going to continue on with another student. So this student, I thought did a really nice job with color coding or labeling. Again, you have to be careful and make sure that they labeled it correctly. So what's nice is that they also mentioned the controlled variables. I didn't see a lot of students thinking about things that should be constant. And this person definitely knew that the rain, they wanted to kind of be in the center. So instead of saying the center or the default, they gave me an actual precipitation, and they even filled that in for me. And some of you are thinking, well, I can't fill it in because I told you to leave it blank. But this, because it's a controlled variable, is great that this person filled it in. There's no guessing. I don't have to worry about entering that in. It's just something that I know I should always be at 5 centimeters every single time I do that. Another thing that they did was that independent variable is labeled, but I have to make sure that that is definitely something I can change. So yes, land cover, the type of land I can change. Again, it might be nice to know if I'm comparing water, or am I doing every single one of these and they should give me more spots to do that, or am I comparing maybe the crops to grassland, to maybe barren land, to forest, or am I doing a little bit of greenery to a little less greenery to a little bit more water to completely water? I'm not quite sure what type of conclusion can be made. So that might be something that they might want to clarify a little bit more. Dependent variables. It looks like I can measure the runoff. Definitely, if I do this, I am able to measure that runoff. That is not something I can control. It's something that changes due to what I change over here. And then they also mentioned infiltration. Now, infiltration is a dependent variable and it is a result, but it is something that in my hypothesis that I set up, I did not mention. So you want to be careful on that, because I did not mention anything about infiltration. Again, I can definitely make some conclusions based off of the type of land, and the runoff will be my dependent variable. So moving on then. Oh, actually, before I move on, there is one thing that I just want to make sure. They mentioned the rain was a controlled variable, and I set that there, but I wasn't sure what soil group to also set that. So that might be another controlled variable that they might want to mention that I should always keep constant. And they said controlled variables, we're going to use those fixed variables. Those are fixed, those are constant as well. So moving on, this is another data table that another student turned in. And again, things were not necessarily labeled independent and dependent, but that could be something really easy to do. They did, looks like they labeled precipitation. They even filled in for me what precipitation I should be changing it to. So I know that low, I'm probably doing low medium. Now I'm not quite certain if that's low medium or not. So maybe they want to actually put the actual number for precipitation. I'm assuming that this is medium right in the middle, medium high, and then again high, but they might want to actually put in the number for precipitation. And I'm obviously looking at the runoff. And again, here they mention the infiltration, but my hypothesis does not mention that. So I'm probably not going to include that infiltration as my dependent variable. Um, I think that this is what I'm supposed to change, which looks like they filled that in for me. So I'm guessing that's my independent variable, but instead of guessing, it'd be nice if that was labeled. The land cover, I'm not quite certain what land cover I'm supposed to choose. And I'm not quite certain what soil group I'm supposed to choose. So if I'm changing the soil group and I'm changing the land cover and I'm changing the precipitation, that is three things that I am changing. And I do not want to be changing three independent variables at once. So I definitely want to make sure that I probably fill this in for them. What soil group should be constant, what land cover should be constant, so that I can see if the precipitation, the higher the precipitation, is going to affect my runoff. And I just want to reiterate titles. How a title is really easy. It's just going to be in this format. How does the independent, so this person, I'm guessing the independent was precipitation. How does the precipitation affect the dependent would be my runoff. So how does the precipitation affect the runoff? And that would be a title that you could easily add to yours. So what I want you to do, there's two parts to this assignment, is before we go off and give our data table to someone else to fill in from the simulation, you want to fix yours before you share it next time. And the second part is, so what if there's more runoff? What if there's this exclamation point and all of a sudden we have a lot of land developed and we don't have a lot of infiltration and the runoff is like really high? What does that mean? Why is that maybe potentially bad? Or if it is, like, how is that going to really impact me? So, what I'm going to have you do is look at kind of a poster and a little short video that explains why this runoff really does have some negative impacts.